Quest for the Secret Fire is the sophomore full-length album from Moss Upon the Skull, a Brussels, Belgium-based progressive death metal band who started out in maybe a little bit more of a technical death metal mode and quickly turned the tides there with very strong bass performances. They had linked up with Damien Herring for their first record, and it really all came together by the time their first EP came out, but the invengeful reverence kind of tied it all together and made it all official, all the work they'd done at that point. There wasn't an exact great comparison to make at the time. I guess Horrendous is the most common one. I wouldn't say that they sounded like Horrendous at the time, certainly not, but there was some of that dynamic songwriting in the same way that went for dramatic builds, as well as just the more introverted side of progressive death metal that was a little bit more classic. You could tell there was some interest in progressive rock song structures at that point, and that's part of the course for progressive death metal in any thoughtful sense. So at any point, their sound kind of shifted over to something that was a little bit different, but probably due to different members coming and going over the years. I think the thing to note for this record is there is a new bassist on hand here, and his performances are a little bit less prominent at first. The production values are a little bit different, and what we'll have to do is kind of gauge the past a little bit differently than where they're at now, because this record is both themed and also it kind of does its own thing in the way that it arranges the full listen. So I'll get to what's interesting about this record after we listen to a clip and sort of talk about what's the good and the bad of the way they put this thing together.
Blessed by the black flame, raised by a holy fire. Destruction is our only aim, the ruin of the sacred spires, residing from the sea's arcade.
So when any band is labeled progressive and we start to hear what I call the 70s escalator prog rock riff runs, of course we get comparisons to the later style of Edge of Sanity and maybe Opeth in some regard, and I think that fits here. But I would say Anaretta from Horrendous is also maybe a point of interest in terms of sussing out exactly what makes Moss Upon the Skull tick in terms of the flow of this album. The way that I would describe the experience of listening to this record or watching it being performed or whatnot would be playing with a viscous liquid, stringing it together, and maybe imagining the ways that you could twine together something in creation, in the sense that they're kind of flowing through a lot of ideas that make a lot of sense in the flow of the full album. But when you chunk them out into parts and into songs, not all of them give you the whole picture of the creation. So we get a lot of dynamic movement, we get a lot of fluidity, we get a lot of technique, and we get a lot of personality from most all of the performers here, and that makes it an impressive progressive death metal album in any sense. Not necessarily a classic style one. This is maybe more of a modern lean than I would have expected from the band in terms of the production values, the guitar forward, and kind of needled out riffs that rant along through a lot of this record, and less of the bass-driven movement and whatnot. Now, there are definitely more focused sections than others, but again, it all flows together in a certain way that is pretty interesting for what it is. I wouldn't say this is a memorable album in terms of song over song, or there's no obvious single here. But what the band does in stringing together and playing with all the different tools in the toolbox is they make an album that it involves the mind. It feels conversational in both a musical sense and in the way that they're depicting their own journey into creation with this record, and kind of finding their inspiration throughout. So it's an interesting, you could go deeper with it if you really wanted to, but it is just kind of a solid progressive death metal record for people who nerd out about that kind of thing. For me, that's a moderately high recommendation. I don't think that they've completely broken the mold. I don't think that they've stood out in such a strong way that you'll never forget this record, but it is a solid record. It's a very good record, and it's one that will please the needs of the modern progressive death metal fan, as well as maybe the classicist who's looking for a little bit more depth and a little bit less show. And the journey you take with this record is valuable overall. So check it out for yourself. That released on November 8th. And read my review for more of my thoughts on the way that it plays out, and just a bit more detail in what I thought about it.